All right, good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the August 3rd Thursday Web Forum. My name's Hillary Morris, and I work on user support and communications for the South Atlantic Blueprint as well as the Southeast Blueprint. Y'all probably know we host this web forum every third Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. to give folks a chance to ask questions and provide input to help guide the conservation future of the South Atlantic. And we've been collaborating with the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center on the last few webinars, but this month we are back to our typical format. So as usual, here's the agenda. I'll start by introducing our speaker, and then we'll listen to our main talk for 30 to 40 minutes. We'll have time for Q&A and discussion at the end, and then I'll preview next month's webinar. We may actually pause for questions a couple times throughout our talk today just to make this a little more interactive, since it looks like we have a pretty manageable group. And to that end, I'm going to try to keep us out of silent mode, which will make it a lot easier for us to interact and have questions and discussion. So I'll just ask that everyone please be mindful of their own mute button so that we can keep us in talk mode today. If you have questions at any time, you can jump in or just use the chat box, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. So any questions before I get started? Great, so Rua is going to be giving our talk today. You probably know Rua is the coordinator of the South Atlantic and the Southeast Conservation Blueprints. I'm going to jump in as well toward the end to talk about how you can access the blueprint data. So today you'll be hearing about the latest and greatest version of the Conservation Blueprint for the South Atlantic, Blueprint 2020, which was just released a few days ago. So this is hot off the presses. Rua, over to you. I'm going to pass you the presenter power, and you can take it away.
Welcome, everyone. So before I even get started with this, I just wanted to give y'all a heads up of a few discussion questions we'll be talking about at the end here. So just so you can chew on them, if you're the kind of person that wants to chew on a little bit before we go through the stuff. Two big pieces of feedback we're looking for today from you is, one, where would you most likely see the blueprint priorities improved in the next version of the blueprint? We're going to be doing an update again. So thinking about, is it in the uplands? Is it in wetlands? Is it in freshwater aquatics, the rivers, streams, reservoirs, lakes, those kind of places, along the coast and in the kind of open water part of the estuaries, or in the farther offshore marine environment? So thinking about like which places you want a little extra love for the next update. And then also just a more open general question about what improvements you'd like to see in next year's blueprint update. So you can always pass. That's all good. We'll probably just be kind of going to different folks. You can answer over the chat. You can answer with your voice, however you want to do it. Like I said, you can pass too. But I just want to give you a heads up of some questions that'll be coming up at the end after Hillary and I give you the quick catch up. All right. So what's changed and what hasn't with this new version of the blueprint? Well, I will say that the big message is that the broad patterns are similar, but the finer details are better. So if you zoom way out, here's kind of two pictures. In general, the broad patterns of important places stayed pretty similar. In the marine environment, they're exactly similar because we have not updated that with Blueprint 2020. That's something we hope to do for the next version. But in the inland part, broad patterns are very similar, but it's really about final details. Another thing to note is that we did expand the blueprint area a little bit to help with buffering cases and situations in user support where kind of blueprint users want something right at the edge of the border. So you will notice there's a little bit more along the Appalachians. That's where all that new priority areas comes from in this next version of the blueprint. So this is the old one. This is the new one. Old blueprint. Now we're zooming into, this is up along the Waccamaw River. So we're here on the border between South Carolina and North Carolina, around Horry County. This is the old blueprint. A few things I wanted to really draw your eyes to is the kind of resolution. So you can sort of see the chunky resolution even in the inland side of things, which used to be 200 meters. And then also this sort of speckling that we see in the priority. So it's not quite as connected, and that was some of the feedback we've gotten from folks of what they'd like to see improved for this version of the blueprint. Was addressing some of that. So this is the old blueprint, and this is 2020. This is the new version that's just officially released. So finer resolution, 30-meter pixels, and we're also using methods that create a more connected network of lands and waters. So The kind of riparian areas and upland areas are less speckly and more kind of a connected whole. So I'll do that again real quick just to give you a sense of old blueprint, new blueprint. So the big take-homes, I would say, for this, when we think about that, the finer resolution and the methods and stuff, is that, yeah, they're a little bit more detailed, and they're overall everything is more connected as a network. Before we even add the corridors and hubs and things like that, we have a more overall connected network. The finer resolution especially has been important as people have gotten more and more interested in using the blueprint at parcel levels. We're getting more land trusts and counties and other groups wanting to use the blueprint as well. And so that finer resolution is pretty important at that point. All right. So the other cool thing about this with our new methods and resolution is that we're also better aligned with more local data priorities with different states and other data sets that people reuse. So one of the testings we did fairly early, we like to test the blueprint against a bunch of different other priorities, especially things like the North Carolina significant natural heritage areas that are purely based on survey data and aren't really modeled. And so this is from our testing in the Piedmont, where this new version of Blueprint now covers 96% of the significant natural heritage areas. So that's up from about 88% in the last version of the Blueprint. And it's a little hard to see the little black outlines, but there's a whole bunch of these little significant natural heritage areas that are prioritized in the Blueprint. And there's still a few we're missing. So I said 96%. That means there's still some that we're missing. These generally tend to be kind of the lower ranks of all of them, the sort of lowest class of significant heritage areas. But we have been going through the ones that we're missing in this version to sort of see are there some common elements that we could better capture with future indicators. And so far, a lot of them have been related to unique kind of hard sand soil types. And so that's something we're looking at in the Piedmont Prairie indicator into the future related to some of those soil types. So that might help for next year. So better aligned on the North Carolina side here. That's the Yadkin River, by the way, in case anyone needs to know that. And then also the Florida Blueprint, which is strongly connected with Florida Cliff. So in the Gulf Coastal Plain, this new version of the Blueprint is now up to 82% overlap with the priorities from the Florida Blueprint, and that's up from 72% in the last version. So we're getting better overlap there. The biggest difference is in working lands in the Big Bend, where the current version of the Blueprint kind of picks out some of the more natural wetter areas that haven't been impacted and aren't pine plantations now, whereas the Florida Blueprint kind of grabs more whole chunks that include more uplands and wetlands, and even though the uplands are kind of heavily modified pine plantations. So we're working on some improvements on that as well. The other thing that the Blueprint incorporates that doesn't really come out in the Florida Blueprint, and another reason for lack of overlap, is more of the urban open space areas. And so kind of those important areas for connecting people to nature, those are captured, a lot more of those are captured in the South Atlantic Blueprint versus the Florida Blueprint. So continuing to get better on that overlap, but it is always nice every time we improve this stuff to have better integration with other data sets. All right, so that's the really high-level stuff. Now I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about some of the improvements, what we've done. You'll see we've got some new indicators. There are two new indicators for this year. One is resilient coastal sites. So these are looking at these different salt marsh complexes along the Gulf and the Atlantic, and basically looking at how resilient are they to future change. And so it's looking at basically the migration space, the size, a number of different characteristics about condition and the ability of the salt marsh complexes to move inland and still sustain biodiversity into the future. So that includes some of the other things about sort of number of tidal classes and diversity within these salt marshes. So it's about their ability to move in the future, but also includes a number of components, the water quality, the diversity of tidal classes that should be important for them as habitats once they go underwater, as they transition from salt marsh to more estuarine and nearshore marine habitat. So that's what this indicator is better capturing that. We also have the new greenways and trails indicator. And so this is looking at your sort of experience from a human use recreation perspective of these trails. So it's really looking at a combination of kind of how far can you go on these trails based on some common activity type, and how natural is your experience going to be along these greenways and trails. So that's another one of the new indicators. It was one of the commonly requested improvements from the past. So those are the two new indicators from this year. And then we improved a whole bunch of other ones. We have a new way of looking at habitat patches, intact habitat cores instead of the low road density we did before. We got a bunch of state-level data for our low urban historic landscapes, which is much better than the national data set. We expanded urban open space from just the upland hardwoods ecosystem in the Piedmont to pretty much the entire landscape. We've combined our amphibian and reptile conservation areas that were split by forested wetlands and pine and prairie, and also only applied to the coastal plain and didn't apply to the Piedmont. So we've extended that. We've made some improvements to some of our bird indicators and then merged them together in a more cohesive forest bird indicator. A lot of the birds actually cut across the ecosystems we've used before, so we merged them together. And then we've also merged our kind of salt and freshwater extent and patch size indicators as well. So with the new methods that we've done and some of the improvements, we've also not just improved, but also merged some indicators so they operate better across multiple ecosystems. So we can treat those ecosystem priorities not as within ecosystems, but more as a holistic connected group. And those are the improved indicators for this year. And we also have some new modeling steps that we've done this year in order to make that a more connected network. So this new method is that we start with now is at the very, very beginning, we remove low conservation value areas and reservoirs. So we're in the Research Triangle area. This is around kind of Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill here. And the red areas are ones we remove before we do the prioritization. We're removing some of these low conservation value areas are places that basically tend to be pretty highly developed, don't have a lot of historic significance, aren't kind of important urban open space and recreational assets. And those are places that weren't going to make it into the blueprint anyways. And also reservoirs, we don't really have good indicators and a good approach for reservoirs. And so those are already altered systems. We recognize we'd love to be able to capture some of the important areas within the open water parts of the reservoirs, but we just don't quite have the ability to do that right now. So we've taken those out as well. And this is the first step in the modeling now before we run the prioritization. So from there, what we do then is we use those as edges. So we're thinking about when our prioritization runs, it picks from the edges that this is created, not just around bigger cities, but around roads and gas stations and all these kind of impacted areas that you have across the entire South Atlantic region. Those are the places where our algorithm starts prioritizing and then works its way through that area based on the indicators. So that's in the next step. This is the same place, but now this is showing the priorities that come out of the zonation. And so what it's trying to do is it's trying to conserve high-value representations of all the different indicators. And so the white areas that you're seeing were the ones we took out in the beginning, and then red areas came out very early, and so those are the ones that are the lowest priority until as you get to cooler and that blue areas, those are the ones that are held on for the longest. So what it's basically doing is it's starting from those edges and kind of looking at pixels that it can throw out and do the least collective harm to all the indicators. So you do still get some places that are really kind of irreplaceable. You can't find anywhere else or important for the indicators that stay in, regardless of how many pixels you removed around them. But overall, in the grayer landscape, you end up with this more kind of connected core of different ecosystems and habitats. So a more connected network of lands and waters than we did before when we prioritized just within ecoregions and then put them together, or within ecosystems and put them together. So that is a new application to a similar kind of thing we did. And, the other improvements I forgot to mention is that for a lot of the indicators, we also made them finer resolution. So we got them when we could. Most of them we got down to 30 meters, which is pretty nice. Then the next step is the same as we did before. We take the highest priority places, big aggregations of them, and those become our hubs. And then we do least pass corridors between the hubs. I think there's someone that might need to mute their phone.
Fair amount of background noise. Yeah, if you could put yourself on mute, we can hear your conversation. I can put us in silent mode if I have to, but I think that's better.
Okay. Cool. All right, so then we have our least cost path corridors between them that are trying to run through as much blueprint priority as possible over the shortest possible distance. And so that's what these gray areas are here. And then we put it all together. So we combine priority areas and corridors, and that's what we get out of this next version of Blueprint. So those last two steps are the same thing that we did before in the last Blueprint. So those have not changed. It's just the beginning, getting at the priority areas is what has changed. So, all right. So we've got some known issues. Not surprisingly, if you've been to one of these talks or been involved in Blueprint, we like to not just be excited about improvements, but also talk about places where there's still more room for improvement. And so I've just cherry-picked a few from each of the broad kind of areas just to give you a sense of some things. So on the terrestrial side, we're still working on some important grassland areas that are under-prioritized. So that includes Piedmont prairies and also certain longleaf areas. There's just a certain level of really good management we haven't been able to pick up yet with the kind of indicators and remote sensing and data. Usually these are kind of smaller areas, but they have really good management and unique assets. And so we're still working on some of those places. Another thing is that some of our inland migration corridors, so the places for salt marsh and everything to move, and also some cross river basin corridors are under prioritized. So we've got a few places in Florida and a few of the other spots that I think we can fix with some indicator updates next time that better capture those migration corridors that are going to be important for sort of future salt marsh. And also in a few subregions, some subregions are pretty good. In a few, we've got a lack of cross-basin corridors, so they just kind of all the corridors are running along river basins and so aren't really giving a good pathway for bears and other things that are going to want to move from river basin to river basin. So some naturally work out, some can use some work, so we're looking into that. So there's a couple things on the terrestrial. Freshwater, some important areas of the mouths of many rivers are under prioritized. That's because when they hand off to our kind of open water estuaries indicators, it's just water quality. And so the mouths of rivers are just the worst water quality. And so you kind of have this transition as you go from our freshwater aquatic out into our open water estuaries, where it's like, this is a really important river until you get to the estuaries, and then it kind of drops off. So that's something we want to work on. And some areas with imperiled aquatics are under prioritized. So we've gotten we're doing pretty good in a lot of places, but there are some areas with newer data that we think we can improve. Some of the imperiled aquatic areas important for those. So there's still key spots we're missing just due to the sort of age and approach of the imperiled aquatic indicators. So this is all basically, if you were at one of the Blueprint workshops, if you're one of the 100 some odd people that were doing the virtual workshops, these are either coming from the reviews that you did as we were working on the map, or just stuff that we've noticed as a team working on this. And so we go through all those different workshops and capture everything possible within the known issues. And then the marine environment, a couple of things on the marine environment just to pull out. There's a bunch of important areas and estuaries that we're not capturing very well. It's because, as I mentioned before, we only have one indicator that is an open water part of the estuaries, and that's the Coastal Condition Index, which is very kind of water quality based, and doesn't have a huge amount of dense sampling points. And so that's one thing that there's a bunch of important places that we're not capturing. And also because of the coarse nature of our current boundary between the open water estuaries and the coast, again, similar issues on capturing important areas as we're working on that. And then the other one, some newly discovered deep water coral areas are under prioritized because our current hard bottom indicator was really based on known hard bottom and not potential hard bottom. And so that's something we've got some potential data that we could use to better capture not just newly discovered deep water coral areas, but ones that we haven't discovered yet but are likely to be there. So those are a few of the known issues. I just picked out a few of them. We've got some more. There's a full list at South Atlantic LCC at the Blueprint page. So that is a quick roundup of the new version of the Blueprint. Before I hand it over to Hillary to talk a little bit about how you can access the data and maybe explore a little bit of that and poke around, I'm going to stop to see if anyone has any questions.
Hey, Rua, this is Chris Irwin with American Forest Foundation. When you were talking about on the corridor slide, you talked about how those priorities were set, and I think I heard you say low cost, shortest distance. And I'm just curious, what goes into the low cost criteria, and are you taking into account soil type, veg type, forest type in terms of determining those corridors?
So the way the corridors work now is the cost layer is coming from the Blueprint priorities. So the better stuff in the Blueprint, the most important stuff in the Blueprint, is the easiest to go through. The stuff that's not a priority in the Blueprint is harder to go through, and it's a continuous thing, so it's not in the bins. And so what it's trying to do is saying, okay, the best places to connect along these corridors are the places that are going to be important for conservation, and that's a range of different upland and kind of wetland habitats. So that's what it's doing for that. And then the other thing it's looking at is just distance. So, it's kind of an equal weighted thing. How much priority do I get to go through? And then how far do I have to go to get there? One other thing we were looking at doing after the fact to look at feasibility of those is also looking at taking our parcel data and looking at parcel density to see how many landowners we need to go through to actually make that corridor happen. And so that's another thing we're kind of looking at as well. But it would be sort of like, here's where the ecological corridor would happen, and then here's how hard it might be. Like, how many landowners do you have to work with at the end to kind of finish this corridor? That'd be a combination of protection and parcels.
Thank you, Rua.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for fun.
Any other questions?
Other questions? You can also type them in the chat, too, if you want to ask them over chat. All right. Well, I will hand it over to you then, Hillary, to talk about how to access some of this data.
All right. Well, I'm just going to share my screen, and we're just going to walk through together where we'd find some of the information about the latest Blueprint. So we're just going to start by Googling South Atlantic Conservation Blueprint, and the first search result that we're going to see is that page that Rua mentioned, the South Atlantic Blueprint page. And so if I go here, this is typically the first landing page that we like to send people to learn more about the Blueprint. So there's all sorts of great information here, some background on the Blueprint, where to get the data, and then all of those known issues that Rua mentioned. He cherry-picked a few to walk through on this web forum, but if you want the exhaustive list of all of the known issues, that's all here on this page. And while I'm down here, I want to mention that you're definitely under no obligation to cruise around and dig into the Blueprint yourself. You can always go straight to user support staff for help. And so if you go to our Blueprint staff page, there you'll find contact information for everybody on staff for the Blueprint. And particularly, I encourage you to reach out to me or to Louise if you'd like help using the Blueprint in your work. There's a lot of data, and some folks like to dig into it and some people don't. So we're here to help you if that's more comfortable for you. So from the Blueprint page, there's a number of ways that you can go from here to dig into the data. You can go ahead and just download the Blueprint into your desktop GIS, and that's going to download a zip file where all of the Blueprint data is compiled together for you, the indicators, the extents, the Blueprint priorities, the corridors, and so all of those layers are in that package for you, where you can play with it in whatever desktop GIS system you have. You can also go to the CPA to access the blueprint data. CPA stands for Conservation Planning Atlas, and that's kind of our online free alternative to GIS for those who just want to explore the data in an online viewer. We're going to go there in a minute, but I also wanted to mention this link to the blueprint in the Simple Viewer. Some of you may be familiar with our Simple Viewer interface, and we're still working on getting that updated to the Blueprint 2020 data. So this link is grayed out right now, but we'll be bringing you these blueprint priorities in the Simple Viewer this fall, so stay tuned for that. So in the meantime, if you want to play with the blueprint online, the best place to go is to the Conservation Planning Atlas, and that link's going to take you to the Blueprint 2020 data gallery. And just like that zip file that I mentioned of the blueprint download packages all the blueprint data up for you in one place, that's exactly what the data gallery does in a more interactive way. So here you can go ahead and open the blueprint priorities in a map and explore them. Some of the metadata associated with the blueprint is here next to each layer. So if we open this in a map, this is just going to give us our online mapping interface to play with the blueprint priorities. So this is pretty basic. It's the CPA that we all know and love. So to show you the other information that's available in the gallery, we've got some documentation here that I'll talk about in a moment. All of the indicator layers are here, and they're organized by freshwater, marine, and terrestrial indicators. So let's say that you wanted to check out one of those new indicators that Rua mentioned, maybe resilient coastal sites. We can click on this indicator layer and view it and read about the data that it's based on. Okay, the input data is from the Nature Conservancy's resilient coastal sites. Here are the values. Here are the known issues. So all of that information is available there for you. So you can play with and explore any of these indicators. You can do the same with the corridor analysis. So the hubs and the corridors are here for you to explore and view, the blueprint priorities as well. And then there are some threat layers that you can overlay with the blueprint priorities. Specifically, we've already pulled in for you some sea level rise scenarios from NOAA's sea level rise inundation models and sleuth urban growth. So you can build maps with any of these and overlay any of these layers. In terms of documentation, so far we've updated 2 major documents associated with this blueprint. The first is the South Atlantic Blueprint Development Process, and so this is basically a big PDF kind of final report style document that packages up all of the metadata associated with the blueprint. So if I open this document just to give you a sense of what it looks like, this is the South Atlantic Blueprint 2020 development process. And it gives you background on the blueprint. It talks about all of the indicator data and what that's based on, the specific parameters that we use to run the zonation. Same with the corridors, what parameters are we using in Linkage Mapper, how do we stitch all that together in the blueprint. So this is really detailed for somebody who wants to get into the nitty gritty and read 100+ pages about how the blueprint was put together. So if you've got a lot of free time on your hands with all of this stay-at-home coronavirus stuff, maybe you want to read through that and check it out. I'm kidding, none of us have free time. But so that's the blueprint development process document. The blueprint implementation strategy basically compiles conservation actions that are recommended from various agency and partnership plans that you might want to undertake in the blueprint priority areas. So we've updated that to Blueprint 2020 as well. So that's essentially the blueprint data in a nutshell, where to go to access the data and documentation. Does anybody have any questions about that? Louise adds in the chat that I love it when people contact me for user support. We both do, so definitely feel free to reach out to us if you're curious about how the 2020 blueprint could help you out in your work. All right, Rua, so with that, I'm going to hand it back to you to do our interactive input piece.
Now on to basically the questions we had before, as I mentioned. Just a chance to kind of go person by person. You can pass, or I'll kind of mention it over the phone or over the chat. If you want to answer over the chat, that's fine. But I think I'm going to do, since we got a small enough group, just remind you of the questions, and I might just kind of go person by person and just get your thoughts on this piece here. So again, the first question is, where would you most likely see the blueprint priorities improved? Uplands, wetlands, freshwater aquatic, coastal estuaries, marine. We're asking this question because as we work on updating and improving the blueprint and indicators, we tend to work on just general clusters or kind of components of the ecosystem that couple themselves fairly well. So the coastal estuaries, the marine, the kind of rivers and streams tend to cluster fairly nicely with a collection of indicators we can work on. So thinking about where in general would you like to see the blueprint priorities improved. And then the next one is, what improvements would you like to see in next year's blueprint update? So more broadly, just like, what cool stuff would you like to see us work on? So this is the kind of stuff we use as we're considering prioritizing what cool stuff we want to do for next year's update, which we'll start on pretty soon. Okay, so those are the discussion questions. And then let me see. Actually, I might have, since I can't actually see.
Yeah, because you're sharing your screen. I can do
people
that.
at the same time. Oh, wait, no, I can. Aha, I can. Magic. Okay, it's fixed. Now, there we go. You can still kind of read that slide, I think. Close enough?
Yeah, it looks fine.
Cool. There we go. So I can do this. So now I'm just going to go down the list in how I see it, and then just kind of get your thoughts on these questions, kind of like a round robin. And again, you're free to pass. You're just like, I'm just listening. I don't know. That's fine. That's cool. Let's see. So I'm going to start with Brad. Brad, what do you think?
Yeah. Thanks. So this is all brand new to me, so I'm going to pass and just kind of listen to what everyone else is talking about. Never sat in on one of these before, but I appreciate it. Thanks.
Oh, well, welcome. All good to pass, too. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Rua. I really appreciate you guys continuing the outreach around this incredible tool. I would just tell you at American Forest Foundation, how we use it is it's in our planning phase for engaging family forest owners in improving habitat for at-risk wildlife. And so, while I was particularly interested in the corridors, and then you struck on a point with looking at how many landowners do we actually have to work with to connect these two areas. That's really important to me and our organization in terms of any level of detail that you can provide around the landowners in the strategic geographic areas or the corridors, whether it's ownership name, ownership type, ownership name, anything of that nature is helpful to us. We've got a national data set of the parcel records by owner, but not having to look at your site and then go and look at another site. If we could just all do it on your site, that would be most helpful to us. So any level of detail around the landowners that's in those priority areas and corridors would be most helpful to us.
Cool. Okay. That is very helpful. Let's see who else. Jason. Jason Ayers, I think are you on? You might be on mute.
He may also have had to step away.
Okay, that was positive. Okay, and that's all right. We'll come back. Katie.
Hi, I'll pass. I'm still learning about the blueprint, so I don't really have much input at this time.
Oh, good. Well, welcome. And also for new folks like Brad and Katie, in the future, we love to hear if you're experimenting or interested in using it through user support, glad to help. But also if you have any questions or things you notice, like, I wish it did this, or like, this would really help me. We're always open. You can always email Hillary or me or something like that. We love hearing from folks. It helps us prioritize all the cool stuff we could do, like I mentioned before. So, sounds good. All right. Mary, what do you think? What would you like to see?
I think for me, the coastal estuaries and marine are really, really key, because I think that's where we're going to see some of the, the sea level rise impacts and things like changes in salt marshes. I'd really like to see some of this emphasis on living shorelines being developed. So I know a lot of that along South Carolina coast, you got that intercoastal hard waterway. Most of that has been hardened. So I'm very concerned that we may see some real challenges with salt marshes being able to reform in the future and that potential ripple effect.
Thanks. Yeah, we've got some good stuff on shoreline hardening and those kind of salt marsh migration stuff that I think could interact really well that we're wanting to work on. So that's great. It's helpful. Cool. All right. Michael.
Greetings.
Hey.
I've been following you folks have been doing. I think it was the first time I've actually been able to listen through a whole call. My interest is in the wetlands, the Picassins, the Carolina Bays, and just wanted, my interest is to make sure that they're properly represented in all of this because, pragmatically, there's areas where 90% of the land surface is Carolina Bays, so we can't preserve all of that. But those that have some potential for being recovered, have some focus on that.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, that's actually one of the known issues of a few of the Carolina Bays that we're trying to better capture in some of the prioritization. So yeah, it's one of the things on our backlog of lists is actually some improved. Spent a while looking at the different layers and kind of validating and testing some different options based on some really important known bays. So that's good feedback for these places.
Yeah, the important thing, the importance is the aspect that I can't really add to it. And as you mentioned, the value aspect, interesting way about, it's not a monetary value, it's a value to the community, and a value to the success of the ecosystem. What I do have to offer on that is I have digital elevation maps for the entire coastal plain online in Google Earth, and with every single Carolina Bay, about 55,000 of them, identified in extent and metrics on them. But that's just a raw list. The reality is that taking that, combing it for the ones that are of value, to add them to it, is a task far beyond my capabilities.
That's perfect. Can you? Oh, sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, I'd be if you haven't. I was wondering, perhaps some of you folks have already recognized. I've been doing it for 10 years now. If not, I can certainly give you. It's publicly accessible for anybody using Google Earth. Anyhow, I process it through Global Map or GIS, but I don't. I'm not offering GIS-based tools because they're not really. Yours is offered a GIS tool, and for the specialists, it's appropriate, but not for general consumption.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you've done in the way of the blueprint to make it available in Google Earth, but that's another whole process in itself. But I can certainly share it as just a quick, short link to get into download the key to it. All the data is in the cloud. And it'll come to any reasonably sized Google Earth installation. It doesn't really run well on a tablet because of the memory requirements. But I don't know if that's a common product for you guys to use, Google Earth.
Oh yeah, we can use. If we can use stuff that works for Google Earth, we can always transform it for however we need to analyze it. That's perfect. I have a feeling. I think I might have been scoping for that query, the stuff that you've been working on as our kind of foundation layer. But yeah, if you want to send that so we can triple check and think if it was the same thing, especially, if you've got, the knowledge of developing that and the quirks and stuff like that, that would be a perfect starting point. And then from there, I think there's a lot of other layers and pieces of information that we can incorporate to kind of into an indicator, into that sort of Carolina Bay indicator or something like that. So that would be fantastic. If you want to just send that link I think Hillary put a thing into the checkbox, and I'll triple check to see if it's the same thing I'm thinking about. But yeah, I would love to work with you on that, and that could be something we could hopefully do up in the blueprint.
Well, I guess I could just put that in the chat, the link.
Yeah, and I chatted you our email addresses too, Michael. If you want to just put the link in the chat, that's fine. Or if you want to email it to us, that's great too. We'd love to have the link to the data as well as your contact information so we could follow up with questions.
Okay. Please email. Oh, there's this number of the contact list here. Contact.
Yeah, can you see the chat? I put our email addresses in the chat.
In the where?
In the chat box of the WebEx.
Oh.
I'll find this here.
It's a very little tiny window here, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
Make it bigger.
If you want to just give me your email too, I can follow up with you.
Okay. Let me just put that in here.
Thanks.
Well. Okay, that.
Beautiful.
And just to get you, just to throw the link in there. Let's see. Best way to get the link. Yeah, the link is, unfortunately, it's not a link. It is a KMZ file because it has to be loaded from there. So I can send you the KMZ file along.
Thanks.
And I still haven't seen the emails here. Unfortunately, the chat window doesn't have any emails.
I'll email you. I see yours in it. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
We'll just email you.
And again, integrating into ArcGIS, I've always thought about doing that. It'd be interesting to put it in as a layer there. If there's some way to do that. But there is 100. The problem is there's 150 gigabytes of raster data for the elevation maps, and that's that's a workload or a layer.
Yeah. I think if we pull out just the bays themselves out of that,
yes.
And then just make that available. That makes it much smaller.
Just a place mark for them. Yes. It can be shared, that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. Look for an email from me, and we will follow up with you. Thank you for sharing that great resource with us.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so then I've got Chris Goudreau. You still there? I think I'm out of. Okay. Anyone else that wants to? Did I miss anybody that might have called in, but I don't see on the participant screen? Do you want to weigh in on suggestions for improvements? Give you a second. All right, cool. Anything else you wanted to finish off with, Hillary?
Yeah, not for the presentation. I will preview next month's web forum if that's all that you have to share. Are you finished, Rua?
I think we're good. That was great feedback.
Great. Well, thanks for your time, everybody, and great presentation, Rua. Thank you. So I'm going to share one more time just to tell you guys what to expect for next month. Our next web forum is going to be September 17th. It'll be same time as today, potentially the same contact information. We've been toying with potentially moving the web forum over to Teams or another platform, but it'll be in your reminder email and on the South Atlantic LCC calendar event for the web forum. We're going to be hearing from Kat Henke, who is the GIS Habitat Coordinator for the Southeast Aquatic Resources Partnership. She's going to be talking about how SARP is identifying opportunities for aquatic habitat restoration across the Southeast. As y'all probably know, SARP is a regional partnership that works across 14 states and Puerto Rico on aquatic habitat conservation and restoration. And they've developed several data sets and some prioritizations to help identify the highest priority restoration project sites for things like dam removals, culvert replacements, riparian buffer restoration, cattle exclusion, stream bank restoration. And so Kat's going to be talking to us about some of those great data sets that they have available in the Southeast Aquatic Barrier Prioritization Tool and in SARP's action assessments. So I'm really looking forward to that talk from Kat about the latest and greatest that's going on with SARP. And so with that, I'd just like to end on this slide. If you are interested in getting more involved in the blueprint, as Rua said, there's going to be lots of opportunities for improving the blueprint again next year. So if you want to get involved with those opportunities, the best way is to join the South Atlantic Web community at southatlanticlcc.org. That'll get you signed up for our monthly newsletter and a monthly reminder email about this web forum. You can obviously connect with your Blueprint staff, with me, Rua, Louise, Amy, Mallory, the whole team here in Raleigh, or with other people who've been participating in the Blueprint. And then, of course, we encourage you to explore the Conservation Blueprint online and let us know if you're interested in using it. Give us your feedback on how well it's working for you. And so that's all I have for today. I can pause again for questions if anything else has occurred to you. All right, well, that's it. Thank you guys again for tuning in and hope that you will join us again in September.